Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well. So, while I've been dealing with my first and hopefully last bout of COVID, I've been rewatching both an old favorite and a recent favorite, Twin Peaks and Baby Reindeer. And watching these sort of at the same time has got me thinking about how the central victims of each story relate to one another, as well as how they relate to my own stories with my own abuser. And in all media, in fiction as well, but I feel like more so in true crime, non-fiction, news media, there's this archetype of the perfect victim. A lot of the time, because of how these conventions work, we see that victim as a woman, a young woman, probably a girl. She's pretty, she's nice, she's kind. Think of phrases like lights up the room, that she's an angel, that everyone loved her. I think that notion is both limiting to the perception of whoever those people actually were, and is hurtful to victims and survivors that can't meaningfully put themselves on that same pedestal. And so I think that Donnie and Laura are great examples of what it actually looks like to be abused. And in terms of what it means to be a victim, how these lines blur, how gray these things can get, as well as the fact that, speaking from my own perspective, I feel infinitely more seen in that imperfection as a survivor than the infantilizing or sanitizing of, the image of the perfect victim. And I think these two characters are great examples of how a perfect victim can't exist. How do you stay pure when abuse happens to you? How do you not let that corrupt at least some part of your being? And even if you've healed afterwards, both of these stories take place either during or in the immediate after effects of the abuse. And so we're able to see the most raw sides of how they were affected. I think one of the major aspects that makes me both sympathize and empathize with their portrayals so well is the fact that Donnie and Laura do a lot of things that would make people say they deserved the abuse. They asked for it. They didn't take appropriate measures to prevent it. Laura willingly participated in some sex work and certainly seemed to enjoy the attention, which is true of Donnie as well, who enjoyed the attention from both Martha and Darian and kept going back because of it. And both of them have problems with hypersexuality, and specifically the confusion that comes with being hypersexual during or after abuse takes place. Do I want this because of my own desires or the desires that my abuser wanted me to have? And while grappling with that, they both look for understanding in dangerous sex. Maybe it's to try to get back to that same place, to work it out, to understand, as well as the addiction to self-hatred and pain. And for Laura especially, I think some sex work is a chance to show control anywhere at all, even if it's fundamentally being utilized by these nefarious power dynamics, facilitating her to be a victim again and again. She needs so badly to know that she has the upper hand somewhere. And Donnie and Laura both have quite a propensity for drug use, which I think for Laura could certainly be called an addiction. With Donnie, we know this comes from Darian specifically, and while the origins of Laura's cocaine use aren't clear, I think it's pretty easy to say that someone like Jacques or Leo was the one that introduced it to her. Whether or not they were drugging her like Darian was drugging Donnie, again, we don't really know. And like I just said, when it comes to Donnie's drug use, it was Darian drugging him, using it to trap him, to confuse his memory, knock him out, and in general make it easier to abuse him. Whereas Laura kind of does that for herself. Her cocaine use is very obviously a coping mechanism. It helps her get through the day, it numbs shit out, and I would assume that makes the harder aspects of either her sex work or her abuse with Bob easier as well. And lots of survivors have those same problems, whether it's their own substance abuse or substance abuse caused by their abuser drugging them. And when it comes to Donnie, I very much understand what he went through when it comes to being obsessed with your abuser, wanting to unravel them, unpack it all, just to understand. And of course, this seems insane to the average person, but he has this compulsive need to calculate and understand and make sense of it. Which, of course, I think, like Terry very consistently says, or like Donnie even admits at the end, he's also addicted to it.
I think you love it. I think it fits you perfectly having her in your life, seeing you as the thing you try so hard to be. She's the embodiment of all your nasty repressions bottled up into one human being.
It's because I loved one thing in this world more than I did her, right? One thing. And do you know what that one thing was? Hating myself. I love it. I'm addicted to it. I don't know anything else.
And addicted to the drama, which, when you've spent a major period of your life in this hypervigilant state, your brain sort of forces you to stay there. It makes decisions that will heighten the drama factor so that it can stay like that. Because your brain feels that that stress level is necessary now to survive. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind when you wonder why these victims keep going back to the situations that have hurt them. We see that Donnie has so many chances where he can turn around, say no, walk away, just not give it the time of day, and he keeps going back. Even if a lot of the time it was because he was trying to be a decent person. But this is all they know. And thus, the, lizard brain part of themselves must enact it in all of their relationships, which obviously means they end up hurting the people in their lives that aren't abusers, and sometimes corrupting those people, whether it's Donnie and Terry, or Laura and Bobby, Laura and Harold, Laura and Donna, Laura and James. It's really hard not to become a perpetrator of something when you're actively a victim. This is something that I certainly grapple a lot when it comes to thinking back on my own abuse, the ways that my abuser would sick me on to other people and act out any of his petty problems with the people in his life. And it's hard to know how much to blame yourself and how much to blame your abuser in the hurt that you then caused to other people because of what they made you do, or because of how you acted when you were in an emotionally vulnerable space. There's this one part in Twin Peaks where Bobby really breaks down and is talking about how Laura made him sell coke so that she could have some.
Did you sometimes have the feeling that Laura was harboring some awful secret, bad enough that it drove her to consciously try to find people's weaknesses and prey on them, tempt them, break them down, make them do terrible, degrading things? Laura wanted to corrupt people because that's how she felt about herself. Is that what Laura did to you?
She made me sell drugs so she could have them.
And this is true too with the ways that said victims interact with their abusers, like Donnie trying to entrap Martha. You get desperate. And obviously, Donnie is a fictionalized character of a real and alive man, but the fact that Laura is dead allows people to try and create that perfect victim aura for her. They call her an angel, they say she's beautiful, perfect, kind, helpful, and she was that as well, but whitewashing her of her true self is just as bad as not remembering her at all. And the show itself knows that and works against it, and almost gets mad at the viewer for believing it, that we fell for it. But think about how many real-life perpetrators of abuse were previous victims. Even in very murky places like Virginia in the Epstein case. So we can blame Laura for possibly also being a sexual assailant, and at the same time, it totally makes sense. Which brings me to a larger discussion about how these shows make me look at abusers with more of a three-dimensional perspective as well. Obviously, Martha is portrayed with the most sympathy, and she should be, but these shows get you to think. What happened to her? What happened to Darian? What happened to Leland? To Leo? To Jacques? To Ben? To anyone to make them this? Were they perfect victims at first too? Corrupted by someone to then corrupt others in this never-ending cycle? And I love that these shows make me think that. It really shows how much they care about getting all viewpoints across. There are no perfect victims, and there are no perfect abusers either. The more that we learn about Leland, the more it's pretty obvious to me that he was sexually abused as well, and that's how Bob made his way into him. I mean, literally listen to what he says at the end there. Bob opened me up and came inside of me.
He said he wanted to play. He opened me, and I invited him, and he came inside me.
And obviously, none of this is to say abuse victims have a free pass to be awful people. It's important to show the world how deeply this can change you, and not just in solitary or passive ways, but ones that make you a harder person to be around, and a person that could potentially enact this same abuse onto other people. When it comes to the fact that Donnie is a fictionalized version of the show's creator, Richard Gadd, I think it's amazing how bold he was able to be in showing from his own perspective his own misgivings and failings and places that he hurt others and hurt himself. And it's amazing that he was able to utilize those same obsessive tendencies he had around Martha and put it together with his writing, acting, and comedy talents to create something that's been so meaningful to so many survivors of sexual abuse like myself. And I hope someday I'll be able to tell my story like that as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was quite a lot with the more intense subject matter and the added deficit of having to hear my voice be like this, but I'd be very interested in the comments to hear what you guys think, what other media has maybe really spoken to you as a survivor, or if you haven't experienced anything like that, what media has made you empathize more with survivors of abuse. So if you like content like this, make sure you like, subscribe. As always, I would love to hear what you have to say. If you have any suggestions for things in the future, have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time.